Sister, a new monthly podcast by lesbian and queer women for everyone. I'm Yaz Duncan and I'll be talking to you about femme visibility. So first, let me explain what I mean by femme visibility. There are stereotypes pervasive in both the straight and queer communities of what lesbians and queer women should look like and what they actually look like. These stereotypes are partly rooted in the butch-femme dichotomy that was popular when lesbian communities first started to appear in large cities during the 50s and 60s. They're also partly rooted in a Freudian conception of female sexuality. If a woman is attracted to another woman, she is somehow unnatural or inverted, as if femininity and being attracted to women are mutually exclusive. These stereotypes have made it difficult for feminine queer women to be recognised for who they are, including within their own communities. Despite increased visibility of queer feminine women in the media, Cara Delevingne and Miley Cyrus haven't stopped ordinary feminine queer women from being presumed heterosexual, even within the LGBT community. Femme visibility, or more accurately, invisibility, is when a queer woman is presumed to be heterosexual just because she doesn't look like the close-cropped, denim and leather-clad bulldykes of old. And of course, there's nothing wrong with being one of those sisters either. I'll be speaking to some queer feminine women both in Iceland and the UK about their experiences. Ingolf is a journalist and law student from Reykjavik, Iceland, and here's what she had to say. In the UK, there's some pretty rigid ideas about what gay women should look like, both within and out with the LGBT community. These stereotypes it can leave gay women who present as feminine of centre, maybe feeling excluded from the community and frustrated at being presumed straight. So what's it like for you being a feminine of centre lesbian in Iceland?
I think here in Iceland we are a bit more liberal than many other countries. So I feel very fortunate to live in a country where I almost never feel different for being gay. Mm-hmm. But of course, you can always do better. And as a feminine lesbian, I have, for example, gotten a few comments for not looking gay enough and stuff like that. But I think there have been taken many big steps forward here in the last few years. And the younger generations, they're so open and there's almost no taboo around being queer here in Iceland with them. But it's more like the older people who take longer time in processing things. The ones who have commented on me for not looking gay enough or being too cute to not be into boys or something like that. Yeah. They've always been from that older generation. But I think with stereotypes in so many movies and TV series and adverts that many people have just become numb and to them and think that that's the reality. But when in fact queer people come in all shapes and sizes.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting what you said about sort of getting trouble for not looking gay enough. And do you think that's a kind of problem just within kind of wider society, or do you think that's a problem within sort of the queer community in Iceland that, there's still stereotypes between maybe the kind of older generation and that's, you can't be gay if you're feminine, and not be looking gay enough is maybe kind of assimilating too much to the sort of dominant culture and not sort of putting your identity out there. Do you think that's maybe still a problem, or?
With the LGBT community, I have not I've not felt that I'm excluded or anything like that because of how I look, but within that community, sometimes I feel like I'm not different enough. I'm so privileged that I shouldn't be complaining or stuff like that. But that's not often and not from a big group of people. And yeah, with the older generations, I think it's slowly changing because we have a huge variety of people in the queer community here in Iceland. And that's great. And just by having an open discussion, we're slowly breaking down the walls, I think. I think that with more visibility, it all gets so much easier. Me and my girlfriend, Maria, we opened a Snapchat account here in Iceland called Hinseinleikin to make queer people more visible. And now we have around 7,000 followers, which is quite a lot here in Iceland.
Yeah, that is quite a lot.
Yeah, and there's always someone new who takes over the Snapchat each day. And we've had over 100 people tell their story on there. So that's been quite a big step in the visibility. And like we've had gay people, bisexual, pansexual, trans people, non-binary, gender fluid people, like for example. And I think with visibility like that, we're slowly breaking down the stereotypes and showing people that the queer community is very diverse. So I think that's very crucial with making queer people more visible and showing those older generations also that just because you look feminine doesn't mean you have to be into boys.
Definitely. Historically, I mean, I studied history at university, and I did my dissertation on the sort of development of lesbian communities from about sort of 40s and 50s. And historically, when queer communities of women started to be more visible in cities, they organised themselves into this sort of butch femme kind of sort of two camps. And more recently, there's been more sort of categories for lesbians to put themselves into, BOI, and still butch and femme to a certain extent. There is debate about whether continuing that butch femme dichotomy preserves a lesbian identity that's been kind of carved out by people before, or whether it actually segregates the lesbian community from wider society. So do you feel that being feminine of centre and a gay woman allows you to kind of assimilate and, for example, sort of pass when you're out and about, for straight giving you less sort of problems? Or do you think that it necessarily erodes lesbian identity, or is that a good thing to kind of assimilate and kind of get away from that butch femme kind of, those rules to play by? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it does maybe allow me to assimilate, but in my opinion, like the way you identify yourself or express yourself or how you look, it shouldn't have to dominate how society sees you, and that's something that, in my opinion, shouldn't be like that. That you should be put in a box just because you're a lesbian or just because you're gay or whatever. But unfortunately I think that still today it's like that, and so many people really want to put other people in boxes and analyze them only based on their looks or sexual orientation, for example. But I think, like myself, I have a family, a fiance and a son, and we're not different from other families just because we're two women, but not a man and a woman. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think it's a good thing, but people are different, and I've heard that some people in the queer community don't think this like I do. Like they want to be like kind of different from straight people and want to put themselves maybe into a box. But like I don't identify myself solely as a lesbian. I'm so much more than a lesbian.
Exactly.
So like for me, I just want to live in a community where it doesn't matter like who you love or how you look. We're all people, and we should be able to just live peacefully all together.
Yeah, well, that's you can't really argue with that as a message. So that's great. So thanks for answering those questions, and that's been a good insight into kind of queer life in Iceland. Definitely hoping to come over and kind of see it, because it sounds amazing over there. So that
it's kind of great, but of course it's not perfect. I'm not saying that we here in Iceland are doing better than every other country, but of course I think it's better than living in many other countries.
So from the land of northern lights and Vikings, and apparently a very progressive queer scene, to a land of tea, gravy and roast potatoes. Of course, I'm talking about the UK. Like Iceland, the UK has some of the most progressive attitudes and laws towards LGBT people and other minority groups. But that doesn't mean that being a queer girl is peachy 100% of the time. I spoke to my friend Corna about her experience. Tell me about a time that someone maybe hasn't believed that you were gay or queer, bisexual. What happened there? Why did they not sort of take you seriously?
Well, I mean, I was trying to rack my memories to think of specific times this has happened to me, but because I know it has. but maybe I've repressed them all because we're all so irritating. But I know this has happened. But I think this used to happen more when I was younger. And ironically, kind of as I've gotten older and would be more inclined to challenge anyone who said anything like that to me, it seems to happen less. But I think when I was younger, I probably found that kind of thing quite gratifying, to be told, oh, you don't look like you're gay. Yeah. Because when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, I only knew one lesbian, and she was butch. And, you know, I think I had a lot of internalized, like, homophobia, misogyny myself. And I heard the way that other people kind of spoke about her, and I was scared of kind of being her because she was the only, like, lesbian I knew. So I thought that's what being a lesbian was. Mm-hmm. And so I think when people said things like that to me, like, you don't look, you can't be gay because you don't look gay, I felt relief. But, you know, as I've gotten older, I obviously have challenged all that in myself. And, you know, I would no longer, if someone said that to me, far from finding it flattering now, I'd be well up for challenging that.
And it's a strange it would be a strange compliment now, because you'd be like, well, what's wrong with being, you know, what's wrong with even looking gay? That's fine, you know. Yeah, I get you. And I mean, I kind of spoke sort of briefly before, and I was just doing my introduction about kind of feminine lesbians, butch lesbians, and how that kind of femme butch thing has really coloured lesbian experience since time immemorial. Do you feel that sort of being a feminine of centre queer women allows you to assimilate? Do you think that assimilating necessarily erodes lesbian identity, or does it just add to it? Does it just make it more rounded?
Well, I mean, this is something I was kind of thinking about, and as a kind of devil's advocate question, as in, like, you know, what is femme, and what makes me femme, and, you know, what made you think of me as someone who's femme?
Yeah. Exactly.
And, you know, how far do I actually identify as femme? Because I think I don't, you know, I kind of pretty much live in trousers. I might wear a skirt once in a while, and I just, it's interesting to think about, but on some level I must identify as femme because, you know, I responded to your question about can any of my femme friends, like, can we talk about this? But I think, so I'd say I don't fully identify as femme, but I don't identify as butch either. And I think there's much more scope now for identifying, not feeling like you have to identify as one or the other, and, you know, we don't think it you know, in such polarities anymore. And I think, you know, there's a sense that kind of like those rigid categories are kind of breaking down, and I think on the one hand that's a good thing because you know, you get, I think there's greater acknowledgement of like more freedom of expression, but perhaps on the other hand, there's kind of a loss as well of those identities. Because I mean, I always love looking at, you know, like pictures from old lesbian clubs, and you've got like
I love
the women in
too.
suits and the femmes, you know. So I think
there's something quite cozy about it.
Yes, there is. Yeah, I suppose it's it's comforting. I suppose in a way. But how much of that is like internalized norms? I don't know. But yeah, no, I mean, I can't, obviously, I don't know what it's like to be anyone apart from me. So I only know what it's like, what my experience has been like. So I can't say, you know, I don't know what it's like to be a butch woman. So I can't say it's, you know, how they might have experienced it compared to me. Do you know what I mean? But objectively, yeah, it probably has helped me assimilate. But then I think also there's kind of subversive power in being femme, I suppose, in that you know, people have these preordained, or might have these like preordained notions about what your sexuality is just from how you look. And I think if you come out and you are femme and someone did assume you were straight, then you're challenging the notion that they have that, you know, because someone looks a certain way, they can deduce what their sexuality is.
Yeah, definitely. And it totally subverts the whole kind of Freudian inversion kind of idea about feminine women, you know, can't possibly be attracted to other women. So it's interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I've been out and had to pretend to be someone's girlfriend because it was sort of decided that I looked gay enough to get into gay clubs, and maybe some of the straight girls or even some of the other queer girls didn't look sort of the part for gay spaces. Do you feel that you've ever been, you know, on the flip side, excluded for not looking like a lesbian, inverted commas? And do you think that's sort of still a problem, you know, within establishments and spaces that are supposed to be gay friendly?
Yeah, I mean, that has happened to me. You know the story well of, like, when we went to Polo and we were told by the bouncers, oh, do you know this is a gay club? And, you know, that has happened to me on Canal Street too. Both incidents, I have to say, were like a few years ago. But yeah, that did happen to me when I first started going out on Canal Street. And I think it was especially disappointing because I was just trying to figure out what my sexuality was. To feel that kind of cold shoulder was kind of difficult. And I think, you know, those kind of attitudes from, you know, I'm thinking of like bouncers on gay clubs, you know, who were saying, you know, questioning your sexuality because of the way you were dressed. Well, you know, I think that just shows how deep-rooted notions about gender and sexuality are, and, you know, that there is internalized homophobia and misogyny in the LGBT community. But, you know, yeah, I have to say that has happened to me, but it was a few years ago. And, you know, more than that, it was probably an assumption that I was straight, which was like equally disappointing when I was 18 and trying to pull.
trying to get in about it.
But yeah, no, so it has happened. But yeah, I have to say not for some years.
So along with my personal experience of a lack of femme visibility, it seems like friends old and new have experienced it too. However, it's encouraging to hear that Ingolf and Corna both agree that the tide is changing and stereotypes of queer women being necessarily butch are being broken down. Touching on what Corna said, it's interesting to note that we never ask ourselves what makes a person femme, or indeed what makes them butch. The way we think about these concepts is probably just as dated as the assumptions we make when we assume that people, including femme queer women, are heterosexual. Wouldn't it be nice if we didn't have to think about any of this, and we just took people for the content of their character? After all, it's really no one's business who you share your bed with. Ingolf wisely said that we're so much more than that, and I for one agree. I hope you enjoyed this first instalment of Sister Sister, and would really love to have you back next month.